The grid, a digital frontier. We tried to picture what the world of the grid will bring to the silver screen for nearly 45 years. We kept dreaming of a third installment we thought we'd never see. And then, one day, it arrived. Welcome back to Tu-Vie. Today we are going over the history of the grid, the story of Tron, and what we expect to see in Ares. Let's get into it. I've been a huge fan of this franchise, and frankly, I feel like the resurgence of love for this is incredible to see. But with so much time has passed since the first movie, the spin-off projects, as well as the comic books and video games, there are some details that have been missed. So today we're going to be going over the history and story of the grid, what the differences of the grids are, and what we expect to see in Tron Ares. So let's first start off with the story thus far. Our story begins in 1982 when the very first Tron movie is released, where we find our main character, Kevin Flynn, already kind of involved with something in the grid. In the grid, he's using his own personal program, Clue. Now, this version of Clue is not the same Clue we see in Tron Legacy. I'll explain the differences in a moment. But Kevin and Clue are communicating and they're searching for some secret file. Meanwhile, Sark and the MCP, or the Master Control Program, are the main antagonists for this movie. And Sark has been told by the MCP to gather all the different programs that believe in the higher power, which is the users. The presence of the users threaten the MCP, as the MCP is a living, breathing AI algorithm in a sense. And we'll get into his story in just a moment. But during Flynn's attempted hacking to gain access to the secret file, Clue gets kidnapped and eventually derezzed. Once derezzed, the MCP gains the knowledge that his user was Flynn. Now, the MCP and Kevin Flynn have a past. That's because the MCP originally started out as a basic chess program, and Kevin and him used to play games together. That's until one man took control of the MCP and gave it unlimited access. And that person is Edward Dillinger. We find out that MCP and Dillinger are working together and that the MCP has access to NCOM's networks, meaning it's growing even further in intelligence and seeking world domination in classic AI fashion. Since the MCP and Dillinger are working together and they know that Flynn is trying to access the system for the secret file, they shut down everybody involved in that entire floor of NCOM. And that's where we're introduced to our other two characters, Alan Bradley and Laura. Alan is working at NCOM and he's personally working on his personal program, the security program, Tron. Bradley believes that Tron can be the person as a security guard for the MCP to gain information and essentially break access from NCOM. And Laura is working on a laser to help digitize physical objects and put them into the grid. And you'll see exactly how this comes to play in just a moment. Alan and Laura get pushed away from their jobs and they go to the one place they think they can get answers from, which is Flynn's arcade, where we find our main character, Kevin Flynn, absolutely breaking records with Space Paranoids, one of the very games inside this universe, and says the famous line, Alan and Laura tell Kevin what's going on and they go meet in Kevin's office, where Kevin kind of tells the details of, yeah, that's kind of because of me. Kevin explains to Laura and Alan that the secret file he's looking for is going to be the very thing that shuts Dillinger down, exposing him as a fraud because he stole all the video game ideas that now made NCOM money. So our three main heroes go to NCOM to try and get Tron inside the system itself. They would have used Tron to get inside the NCOM network to try and help Flynn get the file. But when Kevin goes to the lab to try and gain access into the network, the MCP turns on the laser and sends Kevin into the grid itself. Now, one quick note, this isn't the grid we see later in Tron Legacy and now in Tron Ares. Those grids are three separate grids altogether, and we'll explain those differences in just a moment as well. We get the iconic sequence of Kevin going into the grid with no memory of the outside world and is kind of lost in where he is. Flynn gets thrown into a prison where we meet our secondary character, Ram. Now, Ram is a character we will talk about later in something else, so be sure to remember his name. Sark ships arrives and all the prisoners kind of go outside and they give the whole spiel about the identity disk, the game grid, and everything that's going on about the users. Now, the game grid is the first grid we see in the Tron world. This is separate from the future grids because this grid is purely for like a Coliseum-like event. We get little hints into the Disc Wars where we see Tron fighting 4 MCP programs, and we get the iconic light cycle sequence, as well as the first game, Hyperball, which is like a digitized version of Highlight, the real-life sport. Flynn survives the first game where he's thrown into prison again, where he meets Tron face-to-face with Ram. With Flynn slowly kind of regaining his memory, he calls Tron Alan, the name of his user. And Tron kind of freaks out because no one's supposed to know the real name of the user for every program. Tron, Flynn, and Ram all try and figure out some way of escape. And during the light cycle games, they use an exploitation of a hole due to a crash and escape the grid itself. The three are later separated by a recognizer, the big square ships that are just iconic to this franchise. Ram and Flynn hide out in a broken down recognizer while Tron himself is making his way to the MCP. Inside the recognizer, Flynn activates it and helps it like rebuild itself, and Ram unfortunately took a lot of damage during the fight and passes away. Tron and Flynn eventually meet up and make their way to the portal where the MCP and Sark are ambushing them. Sark and Tron have their iconic disc battle that we see in the movie, and Flynn uses Tron's disc to throw it into the core of the MCP and escapes it, and we get the iconic pose that we all know from the poster. Back in the real world, Flynn is given all the credit and is given title of VP of NCOM, and Alan and Laurie are given their jobs back, and the three are pretty much in good shape, and that's where our story ends. Like I stated, the game grid is very Coliseum-like, and once the MCP is destroyed, all the life returns to the grid. It's very vibrant. It's truly a color scheme I do miss. But this isn't where our story ends. In 2010, we were introduced to the sequel, Tron Legacy. Now, for many of you guys watching, this was probably your first movie to the Tron, like it was for me. And I gotta say, for a movie made in 2010, the practical effects, the CGI, most times, really hold up well. I mean, yes, we all know about Uncanny Flynn. We get it. But everything else in that movie is unreal. And the music. I mean, we can't talk about this movie without the legendary Daft Punk soundtrack. Game changer. But let's get into the main story of where the grid is and the story that continues forward. Years after the events of the first movie, we are introduced to the story of Kevin Flynn and his son Sam. Kevin shares story with Sam over his time in the grid and what it was like to be on the grid, and we kind of get a sense that he's been there multiple times. After sharing a promise that he and Sam would go to the grid, Kevin Flynn goes missing. Sam grows up and eventually starts to begin to rebel against NCOM's current run, Richard Mackey, who was essentially working with Edward Dillinger Jr., Edward Dillinger's son from the first movie, and completely erasing the memory of Kevin Flynn's style of leading the company. Sam breaks into NCOM and leaves them with a very creative message to kind of get off their high horse, and one person on the board recognizes it and knows exactly who's involved. That person is none other than Alan Bradley, who stuck with NCOM to try and change it from within. Alan eventually meets up with Sam at Sam's house and tells him that he got a message from his dad's number on his pager. Sam in disbelief that after 20 years of disappearing, he's going to get a message from his dad, but goes and checks anyway. This is where our story begins, because we go back to the very beginning and the place that started it all, Flynn's arcade. And I gotta say, this moment as a kid blew my mind. Like, this to me was when I locked in. Hearing Worlds Apart while seeing tons of different arcade games that I love to play was just like the thing I needed. It was it's just a great moment. Sam goes through the arcade and we revisit all the different moments we saw in the first movie. Kevin's upstairs apartment, his office, all the different games, and there's one game in particular that stands out, Tron. Sam finds a secret hidden door behind the arcade machine and goes and finds his dad's secret office, where we see a very high-tech touchscreen table, which is awesome, and a newly updated grid laser that put Kevin into his grid. Sam activates the machine and gets sent to a newer, shinier, much updated version of the grid. Sam is later taken by local enforcers and is thrown into the games, where we get just one of the most beautiful shots in the entire movie. One of, not the, but it's up there. Now, in the middle of the games, we are introduced to the biggest muscle in the movie, Rinsler. Sam loses the fight and Rinsler discovers that he is actually a user and not a program. Sam is face to face with the man that's controlling the grid and the games itself, who happens to be his father. Sam, reunited with his father, begins to ask questions and later discovers that this isn't his dad, but the digital duplicate, Clue. Now, like I stated, this is a different version from the one we saw in the original one. That one is derezzed and dead. We later find out that Kevin made a newer and updated version of Clue to help create the perfect system, with Kevin focused on building a new grid that is all about free-flowing information, creating a whole world, a new digital frontier, as he put it. And he needed Clue to help build and continue the process when Kevin couldn't be there physically. Sam is later thrown into what is known as the Challenge of the Grid, or as we know it, the Light Cycle games. With the help of Cora, an AI being made of the grid, she helps Sam escape and takes him to where his dad has been this entire time. We get a really beautiful moment where Kevin and his son are reunited and they kind of just play catch up. Kevin explains that he was ambushed by Clue and eventually even killed Tron, and he missed the window to get back to the real world with the portal. And since then, he's been hiding, trying to take down Clue from within. Now, there are some moments in this movie that kind of add to the nuance of this grid that I think are really important, but I will say the derez bar fight, cinema. Our three main heroes take the Solar Sailor like we saw in the original Tron movie and get intercepted by Clue and his enforcers, and this is where we find out more Clue's actual plot. Clue wants to bring the grid into the real world. He understands that the portal is open, and that's where Sam comes in. We find out that the page was actually sent by Clue to get Sam here, the portal open, and so that Clue can get all of his troops into the real world. It's kind of like the anti-mindset of what Kevin had. Instead of the real world coming to the grid and it being a new frontier, he believes, Clue, that the new world is actually the outside world, and that's his destiny. That's where he needs to create the perfect system. There's a lot of great action sequences that happen in this movie, but the sky battle between our two characters is really where things kind of take a bigger turn. We later find out that Rensler is actually just Tron, and that Kevin knew that. And Rensler is kind of having this moment of trying to fight the corruption that he's been faced and go back to his original program, where we get the classic line,
I fight for the users.
And I'll even go into a little bit of why Rensler was making that little growl sound like this, because I think it's kind of cool and I don't think it's talked about enough. Cora and Sam make it their way to the portal where Clue is standing right in front of it, and Kevin and Clue have this great dialogue moment, and Kevin kind of coming face to face with his demon. The two of them hug it out. The explosion happens, Sam and Cora make it out of the grid and into the real world, and that's where our story ends. Now, I stated the differences of this grid is much shinier and upgraded, which is very true. It's different from the game grid. Like I said, Kevin wanted a free-flowing information kind of world. He wanted a place where the grid is all the same for users and programs alike. And essentially even the color scheme is different, because in the original one, we had red and blue, with blue being the users or the people of the grid, and red being the people under the MCP's control. And now this one, it's orange and yellow and blue and green. There's a lot of different colors for various different reasons. Blue, part of the grid, orange, Clue. I really did love all the different references in this movie from the previous one. The Solar Sailors, the light cycle games, even Kevin Flynn's personal light cycle was something similar in design that we saw in the first movie, which I also think the idea of having old stuff combined with this new stuff really was explored more in the third Tron project, which was Disney XD's Tron Uprising, an animated series in 2012 that is actually pretty good. And I do think it's an underappreciated show. It only lasted one season, and I think it's like 12 or 13 episodes. But this story takes place between Tron and Tron Legacy, when the grid is kind of in a new stage of development. Beck, our main character, experiences the death of his friend due to Clue's uprising in power and taking over the city that he actually lives in. Now, in this show, we get much more views into the grid itself, the wastelands, the seas, the islands, even cities. And our story takes place inside one of those cities where Beck lives. After essentially kind of starting a rebellion, he's kidnapped by Clue's enforcer, Rensler, who we later find out is actually Tron, and he is alive and is badly scarred. Taken under Tron's wing, Beck goes through this entire season of leading the resistance of Tron Lives. And we find out that Tron himself is actually having an infection. It's a virus that is slowly corrupting his own personal system, that he has to kind of go in this beam of health in a way. And without that beam of health, he starts to corrupt and corrode, which is the sound we hear in Legacy. So that kind of growling sound is actually the corruption of his code, which is sick. The main antagonist of the show, General Tessler, is really no one of importance in the future story of the grid, but he is important to the show, obviously, because we need a bad guy. But the biggest takeaway of this show for the story is what happened behind the scenes of the ambush, which is, of course, Tron lived, he's battling an infection of the virus, and essentially kind of just gives into it and becomes Rensler, full-time at least, because Rensler is a well-known presence. He's not of the standard that he is in Legacy, but he's getting there. And like I said about the references to the older stuff, we still had some red soldiers in the very similar style of armor that we saw in the original Tron movie, some light cycle stuff, even the bit. So while Tron Legacy, and Tron Uprising are the three big pillars into the story, there was a secret fourth installment, and it's kind of more of like an online movement thing, but it still provides a lot of details into what's going on. Now, this short film takes place shortly after the events of Legacy. The Flynn Lives movement was started by a person in universe named Zack Attack. And in this short film, we get expanded bits that we were seeing in Tron Legacy, like Alan Bradley's interview, and its whole purpose is talking about how Kevin Flynn is still alive, or at least the fact that they think he is, and the person that's running it is none other than Ram, or specifically Roy Kleinberg, who was the user of Ram. So Ram was someone that I mentioned in the very beginning of this video in the first Tron movie. The video kind of goes over the stuff that was going on behind the scenes at ENCOM. Like I said, expanded more on the Alan Bradley interview and talked about how he was with programmers when Kevin was involved in actively leading ENCOM, and how Sam, now in the real world, is being viewed as a younger Kevin Flynn, like he's back from the dead kind of thing. And we're also told that Sam took over ENCOM and kicked Richard Mackey out. And near the end of the short film, Alan Bradley knew the whole thing about Roy Kleinberg as Ram and the Zack Attack movement, and was even helped funding it. Alan, who is now head chairman of ENCOM, invites Roy to join the board, and even mentions that Edward Dillinger Jr. that we saw in Legacy is still a part of ENCOM, which might come into play in Tron Ares. At the end, we see Sam give the message to the world on a t-shirt that says, "Flynn lives." Now again, not a lot of information was on it. It was still kind of fun to see, but it was still really cool to see that there was much more to this world post Legacy. But really, it just kind of gives us something to look forward to and explains where Ram has been this entire time and what Dillinger's moves might be next. Which brings us to the latest edition of 2025's Tron Ares. Now, what we do know about Tron Ares is that Ares is our main character, played by Jared Leto. Now, we do know that this grid is being run by Dillinger Enterprises. It's not Encom, which I think is great. We did not need to hear that again. But now Dillinger's grid is being brought into the real world with AI characters like Ares, as well as Athena. Julian Dillinger, played by Evan Peters, is trying to bring about a new version of warfare. With AI, 3D print, and all that stuff, they're pretty much bringing in characters from their grid as real AI beings that they're going to be using in the military. Also, if you saw on Disney Plus the Tron Ares special, Gary Vaynerchuk is in this film as a cameo in the whole weapon testing thing. Okay, we know that Ares and Athena are going to be essentially the soldiers that these people are wanting to use. And we also do know that there is also conflict going on inside the grid. Not really sure exactly what grid is being involved with this, because it looks like it's a bit of Flynn, a bit of Dillinger, not really sure what. And I even do like that we're kind of going back to the cityscape, and then it's a whole new grid and not just a recreation of Kevin's grid. We also do know that Ares and Greta Lee's character, Eve Kim, are going to be working together to try and stop something. And also the fact that Kevin Flynn is alive in some format of the grid back in 1982, but not Kevin Flynn himself. It's like a projected being. A lot of what this movie is essentially teasing a bigger conflict, as always. That Eve and Ares are going to be working together in the real world in some fashion, but also in the grid itself. Also, I kind of noticed the big differences in these characters' outfits is because even the disc now has more kind of sharper shapes. It's not as circular as the other one is. A lot of things are still unknown, but these are kind of things I do want to see in this movie. I want to see Leto act the hell out of this. I don't want no lame jokes. I don't want nothing. I want Leto giving the best performance ever. I know he's had some good ones in the past. We got Requiem, we got Dallas Buyers, we got those. Let's just bring that into this, okay? We've waited so long. I also do want an explanation of what's going on with this new grid without relying on a flashback. I want to hear what's going on in dialogue. I want to keep the conversation moving. And also, I want the Ares and Flynn moment not to just be done for nostalgia, but to actually have huge importance in this movie. Because that was something I don't think we were supposed to know publicly. I think Bridges accidentally, spoiled that. But hey, that's a good one. Essentially what this movie is the grid coming to our world. A Dillinger is involved, and we can even see on the back of the suits that Dillinger is on the name of it. So we do know it's his own operated grid. That Evan Peters' character, Julian Dillinger, will probably have some relation to Edward Dillinger Jr., or maybe an uncle, I don't know. But we know he's in part of the Dillinger family. And we do know that Ares is kind of going against his programming. He's rewriting it. He is truly becoming more alive. And so I'm very excited to see where that goes in this next movie. Now, I know that in the games and comics, we've also kind of had different explanations in the grid, but not a lot of that is canon. We had some stuff that are canon. I think one of the games are canon. Either way, it's just a fun exploration of the grid. If you haven't read the comics, go check it out. It does provide a little more nuance into Kevin Flynn and a lot of different characters, but the main focus of the video is just the TV show and the movies. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and also let me know what your guys' favorite thing about Tron. What do you guys think about the new movie? If this is coming out past the movie, let me know what you guys think about it. We will be doing a review of the movie, so be sure to stay tuned for that. Be sure to keep up to date on what's going on in Hollywood on our Instagram and TikTok, where we post daily things so you guys don't miss out. Also, be sure to check out our podcast, the Tu-Vie podcast, where we just reviewed Alien Earth Season 1. I was a really big fan of it. Apparently, I'm the only one about that, but I still loved it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.